Thank you. I'm sort of glad I'm going last because what I'm about to talk about picks up on aspects of everything that you've talked about, the reality of the refugee situation, some of the theories, and also the practice. But I'm not delivering this as an academic paper. I'm going to talk to you about something that I'm involved in, which touches on a lot of these issues. So I'm a filmmaker. I'm also an academic, and I worked at the BBC for 20 years, and I commissioned other people's films. And one of my areas one of the many areas that I commissioned was religion. And I've made many documentaries. And what we do in filmmaking, and what documentary is very good at, is it illustrates the macro through the micro. So you find stories, you find individual stories, you find human experience, you tell that story, and through that you can illustrate a macro issue. Television's never good at taking an issue and saying, let me tell you about this, but it's incredibly good at using the power of human experience and storytelling to illustrate something bigger. One of the things that I have had an enduring interest in is trafficking and trafficked women, and how the refugee crisis in a way has amplified all of that, and also how it challenges us because you can't talk about trafficked women without talking about prostitution. And lots of the organizations that want to engage in discussion about trafficking don't want to talk about prostitution. They want to keep those two things completely separately. So one of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm executive producing a series for British television about the interface between the church and the police and civil society in dealing with the issue of trafficked women. And it's a really interesting story, and how I came upon it was, again, you have lots of contacts, is someone that works within the Metropolitan Police who was Catholic and who was very exercised by the fact that he was often going and raiding brothels and other institutions. And what was effectively doing was criminalizing the women and telling the men off. Anyway, he became engaged with the Catholic Church and the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales in particular, and started an initiative which is quite unusual in that when the Metropolitan Police now go on raids of places of prostitution or illegal sex trade, they take a religious sister or a number of religious sisters with them, and the sisters deal with the women and take them to a series of safe houses and so on, while the police deal with the men. But it's led to a massive sort of initiative which crosses political, social, and civil boundaries, which I'll just talk to you a little bit about. And the reason I'm interested in it as well is that, and I've done some other things on this, is I was really interested in the ability of the church to hold the ring in some quite sort of sensitive issues, and to manage to be there as a neutral space in which you can bring together lots of disparate bodies and to effectively hold the ring. And the Catholic Church, the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales, particularly the Cardinal of Westminster, who's now Bishop Vincent Nicol, had done a very similar thing with the city after the financial crisis, when there was a lot of trauma about the economic collapse and whether bankers were evil and so on, and managed to sort of hold the ring in a really interesting conference around that. So the way I came at it was looking at trafficking, which is modern-day slavery, and the role of the church in holding the ring to discuss this. And actually, what really gave this whole process a drive was the Pope's adoption of human trafficking as a really important issue, and one that he compelled everybody to get engaged with. And he demanded an unequivocal, determined and collaborative approach to the trafficking crisis. So in brief, human trafficking is the second most profitable worldwide criminal enterprise after the illegal arms trade. Estimates run from 36 million human beings trafficked across the globe, and a profitability of about 150 billion US dollars. In the UK alone, we know that there are last year 13,000 people in some form of captivity or subjugation, which is, for a small country, and those are the only ones that we know about. It's highly lucrative, it's incredibly sophisticated, and the criminals exploit people in every way they possibly can. We know that 1 in 3 people trafficked last year was a child, which is quite astonishing. And we also know from the UN that enforced prostitution is now one of the fastest growing and most lucrative crimes. And the whole of the refugee crisis just amplifies all of this. The people that are trafficked, the vulnerability of the people that have trafficked, the ways of getting to them and exploiting them, where they end up, the type of people coming in to the UK in particular, is sort of amplified by this crisis. Trafficking mostly happens within national and regional borders. Transcontinental trafficking tends to be between wealthy nations. Lots of the victims within Europe and Central Asia are mostly trafficked for sex or sexual exploitation. 40% of countries have recorded few or no convictions. And currently Romania is the most common country of origin, and every single possible device you can imagine to exploit these people, whether it's sham marriages, social media, promises of better, all the usual stuff that we know. And what's interesting is that the church's pushing of this issue sponsored a sort of a government political response in the UK, which was quite progressive. So we had all-party support for a Modern Slavery Act, which was passed this year, which is one of the first of its kind, which is hugely significant because it gives extra powers to the police. We can now campaign for life sentences for traffickers. You can seize their assets. We appointed the first independent anti-slavery commissioner, who was the Met commissioner that I talked to you about, a guy called Kevin Highland, who campaigned for the church to be involved in the response to trafficking and prostitution. And also, crucially, extra protection for victims. One of the really impossibly awful things about this was that the victims of trafficking ended up basically criminalizing themselves if they reported or indicted the people that trafficked them. Okay, so that's being changed now. And also it's about joining up and making mandatory a central reporting of all issues of trafficking. We also created a thing called a national referral mechanism, where anybody that is identified as a victim of slavery, trafficking, or so on, is allowed 45 days in a safe house while their status is considered. And there's a special process in place for Syrian refugees as well, where they're allowed 5 years of right to remain while their case is looked at. But what was interesting is that, as soon as the Pope made that statement that human trafficking has become an open wound on the body of contemporary society and a scourge upon the body of Christ, and called a conference at the Vatican last year in 2014 with a declaration of commitment to dealing with this issue, that really sort of motivated lots of people to get involved. And that one conference saw 24 heads of national and international police and law enforcement agencies come together and agree to work as civic, legal, faith-based organisations together. It was followed up this year with another conference in London, at which the Home Office Minister was the least important person there. And it started there's a programme called Santa Marta, which is an international process which really synthesises policy, practice, research. There's a whole system of safe houses called the Bakita House Initiative, named after Josephine Bakita, where the victims of trafficking can go and be given pastoral care, education through one of our local universities. So it's a really interesting thing, but it has really also divided the church around its attitude to prostitution. So we have within religious sisters some who are committed to social care and pastoral care of these women, but who don't want to touch the sort of political hot potato that is prostitution. And yet others would say that demand for prostitution fuels the sex trafficking industry, because all sex trafficking is ultimately about prostitution. And there are some very radical religious sisters in London who are working to try and have prostitution back on the agenda, to have it criminalised in all its manifestations. And that's a slight sort of schism in the work of... but what I'm doing is making a film about, going, joining the sisters and the police on some of the raids, and then following the women's stories through, seeing what happens to them, seeing how that works on a global, and then through that you can look at the policies and the issues and the politics surrounding the issue.